In the early 1990s, Escobar was at the very center of the Colombian cartel wars. For a decade, his empire controlled a significant part of the global criminal market. However, in 1993, he found himself in a difficult situation. Escobar had been ambitious and ruthless since childhood, quickly climbing the criminal ladder to become one of the richest people in the world. However, his empire always depended on violence. During this time, Colombia was engulfed in a brutal war, with the government being supported by the United States. Escobar tried to maintain his power, but the government gradually strengthened its position. One of Pablo's main goals was to achieve the adoption of a new constitution that would effectively exclude the extradition of citizens to the United States. Extradition was his main threat. The U.S. authorities persistently demanded his extradition, intending to hold him accountable for numerous crimes. For Escobar, the prospect of being extradited to the U.S. meant inevitable life imprisonment. He used his financial and political resources to resist this in every way possible. In an attempt to strengthen his position, he offered to pay Colombia's national debt in exchange for stopping the persecution. However, the Colombian government was against it. Tensions rose both within the state and on the international stage. In 1989, his men organized an assassination attempt on future President Cesar Gaviria, which caused international outrage and only increased pressure on the government. In response, the state launched a large-scale campaign against criminal organizations, including deploying armed forces. Escobar faced growing internal problems, and his close allies began to turn away from him. The cartels started competing, and his family was under threat. At the same time, the government conducted targeted operations to destroy the business infrastructure and arrest his associates. As one of the most influential criminals in the world, Escobar was under immense pressure. His business suffered significant losses due to police raids, but the biggest threat remained extradition to the U.S. The adoption of a new constitution in 1991 changed everything. Now, the extradition of Colombian citizens to other countries was prohibited. This was a long-awaited opportunity for Escobar. He proposed a deal: voluntary surrender to authorities in exchange for guarantees that he would not be extradited to the United States. Escobar understood that this was his only chance to avoid life imprisonment in the U.S. and maintain control over the cartel. Pablo Escobar officially surrendered to Colombian authorities, but the conditions of his confinement became unique. He was sent to a specially built prison located in a picturesque area on the outskirts of Medellin, literally created under Escobar's direction. It housed luxurious apartments, a personal gym, and a soccer field. Escobar lived in comfort, surrounded by his people and servants. At first glance, this solution seemed like a compromise beneficial for all parties. Escobar escaped extradition, and the Colombian government could announce his arrest as a victory in the fight against criminal organizations. However, in reality, Pablo continued to manage his cartel from prison. He remained in contact with the outside world through trusted individuals, continued to control the cash flow, and made key decisions for the business's development. For him, this prison was less a punishment and more a convenient shelter from the outside world, where he could enjoy comfort and safety. However, his decision to surrender did not come without consequences. Disagreements began to grow within the cartel. Many of his partners felt betrayed and feared that such a decision undermined their positions. Influential figures began to doubt whether Pablo could effectively manage his business from prison. His family also suffered from this decision. Although he managed to provide them with relative safety, government forces and enemies continued to exert pressure. His wife and children were under constant threat of attack or arrest. Escobar realized that his family had become vulnerable. The Colombian government, despite apparent success, was also not fully satisfied. Although Pablo was in prison, his living conditions outraged the public and called the authorities' legitimacy into question. Many felt that the state had made too many concessions, especially with sharp dissatisfaction from the U.S. They could not accept that a man responsible for numerous crimes continued to run his business and evade justice. For them, Escobar's surrender under such conditions was a defeat, as they insisted on his extradition. But everything changed in 1992 when Pablo decided to escape from there. His escape from prison became the climax of his confrontation with the state. The Colombian government, under U.S. pressure and public dissatisfaction, began to reconsider the conditions of his confinement. Over the year since his surrender, it became evident that the prison for him was more of a residence than a place of detention. Orders for the liquidation of competitors continued to flow from there, and Escobar's influence persisted, albeit weakly. Ultimately, the Colombian government decided that such a situation was unacceptable. The idea arose to transfer Pablo to a more secure prison that would truly limit his capabilities. Pablo learnt of the government's plans, so this was a serious threat for him. If he were transferred to a regular prison, he would lose control over his business and become vulnerable to competitors. Escobar made the decision to escape, simultaneously realizing that he could no longer trust the government. He began to think about a plan. His personal security, which worked for him even in prison, helped him. He prepared escape routes and connections in advance in case of an emergency. His closest associates outside supported the plan, understanding that if their leader fell into the hands of the authorities, the entire Medellin cartel empire could collapse. It became known that government forces were already preparing for his transfer. Then Escobar easily bypassed all security measures and escaped. This was a demonstration of how weak the control measures were. The Colombian government found itself in a humiliating position. Their most high-profile arrest turned into an escape. The US, in turn, tightened the requirements for capturing Escobar. A manhunt was declared for Pablo, involving both the Colombian armed forces and American intelligence services. Competing cartels began to actively act against him. They made covert agreements with the Americans, providing information about his whereabouts and movements. For the US, this became a beneficial alliance in exchange for weakening the Medellin cartel. Escobar sought to find a safe haven for himself and his family. One of his main goals was Germany. This decision was not random. Escobar hoped that a European country could grant him political asylum. He hoped that Germany, known for its bureaucracy and legal protection for refugees, could protect him from extradition. However, the German authorities denied him. Then Escobar understood that even on the international stage, he no longer had support. Therefore, he had to look for other ways to save himself. His family found itself in an extremely dangerous situation. His wife and children were forced to hide, moving between different countries and under constant threat. Multiple attempts to ensure the safety of his family through bribing officials ended in failure. His family became his weak point, and enemies quickly realized this. After his escape, Escobar began to hide in various secluded places in Medellin. He hid in houses, constantly changing locations. He was hunted by both Colombian troops and American agents. He was now forced to live like a fugitive, constantly in fear and tension. His life had changed drastically. There were no more luxurious palaces and security. Only a couple of devoted people, willing to go to the end, surrounded him. His escape from prison marked the beginning of the collapse of Escobar's empire. Each week, he lost control over his empire, and his enemies intensified their pressure. Competitors, benefiting from US support, strengthened their positions, while the Medellin cartel gradually weakened. Escobar found himself alone without reliable allies and under the threat of imminent arrest. A year had passed. Pablo Escobar was celebrating his 44th birthday. But this time it was not a celebration, it was a day full of loneliness. Since his escape from prison, his life had changed dramatically. He stopped on the outskirts of Medellin in one of his last hideouts, hidden among the local streets. Pablo had few resources, so he was on the brink of both physical and emotional exhaustion. The family he had always cherished was under strict surveillance by Colombian authorities and US intelligence. Contacting them was deadly dangerous. Nevertheless, for Escobar, family had always been a priority, and despite the risks, he tried to find ways to connect with them. In the morning, Pablo woke up in anxiety. His sleep was shallow, and every rustle or sound outside caused him anxious thoughts that he would be found. In the last few months, the hunt for him had intensified. The authorities targeted everyone who was in any way connected with Escobar. The CIA was actively involved in this operation, increasing surveillance of any communications, especially phone calls that could lead to his trail. During the first half of the day, Pablo, as always, moved between his hideouts. He avoided using vehicles to avoid drawing attention. By 11 a.m., Pablo settled in one of his hideouts, planning to call his family that day, hoping to hear the voices of his loved ones. Pablo picked up the phone. He knew the line could be tapped, but the desire to hear his children's voices made him take the risk of calling. Pablo spoke quietly, avoiding long conversations and using code words. Escobar struggled to contain his emotions. He asked about the children and wanted to hear their voices, but he only heard silence for a minute. This moment was particularly painful for him. He realized he wouldn't be able to see his family and spend time with them on a festive day. Information about the call reached the authorities. They learned that Pablo was still in Medellin, so they intensified the operation to locate him. Colombian military forces, together with American agents, began to mobilize in the city. However, they still lacked precise information about his location. By this point, Escobar was under immense stress. He understood that he was being actively monitored that day and decided to move to a new hiding place around 5 p.m. Every time Pablo moved through the city, he risked being spotted, but staying in one place was even more dangerous. Escobar decided to call his family. His last hope was to convince them to leave Colombia and start a new life in another country. He knew that abroad he could find asylum, but pride and a sense of belonging to Medellin prevented him from leaving his homeland. When Escobar made the call, the signal was intercepted by the police. Rapid response teams immediately began the process of localization. The operation was carried out with caution. It was important not only to accurately determine Escobar's location, but also to prevent him from escaping. In the following hours, Colombian military units prepared for a decisive raid. At the same time, American agents relayed data on the outgoing call. Intelligence services tried to avoid leaks of information since Escobar still had allies capable of warning him of the impending threat. At that time, Escobar was unaware that the police were already close. Escobar's entourage consisted of several bodyguards he had known for many years. At 11 a.m., he again tried to call his family. This call proved to be fateful. Escobar talked for about 5 minutes, allowing agents to pinpoint his exact location. The signal came from a small house. Colombian troops began to move toward the indicated place. Special forces surrounded the house, and police closed in, blocking any escape routes. Hearing movement outside, Escobar realized he had been found. He quickly grabbed a weapon and, along with a bodyguard, went up to the second floor. The special forces burst into the house. Escobar and his bodyguard climbed onto the roof, hoping to escape through neighboring buildings. However, the police were ready, and a shootout ensued between them. Escobar and his bodyguard continued to flee. The shooting lasted several minutes. At some point, Escobar tried to jump to the neighboring roof, but one of the special forces' soldiers shot him. The bullet hit him in the back. Soon, another shot rang out, this time to the head. As a result, Pablo died. Colombian police and American intelligence announced the successful completion of the operation. Thus ended the story of Pablo Escobar. If you found this video interesting, please support it with a like and subscribe to the channel. See you soon. Let me know if you need anything else.